Okay, so yeah, this remains evident in the works of the 15th and 16th centuries, and that reference is to these heavily depended in like foreign investments. So, excuse me, I just butchered that line. It's that foreign investments were depended on heavily by this population. So, during this rebirth of society in the early 15th century, which marks the second Renaissance, the pandemic that has transcribed the course of business on the global market as the rapid economic growth continues, is considered to be a shift of political structure and destructs the empire's middle class. So this is leaving the majority of society to form a new peasantry class that continues to fall veil to disease, and the new era of modernity begins. This shift prioritizes texts. So from the scientific discoveries of medicine to replace the superstitions of the time, Christian references and influences in the development of art, culture, and leisure practices that are used by the newly literate class to explain the deaths in the world around them. The trading empires continue their participation within the expansion of the port system in the west and eastern colonial front. As this area of the world in the establishment of an all-seas seaport system, the masculinity of the empire, rapid economic growth, exquisite porcelain, and the invention of printing that allowed for mass production of the mythological books and established the literate rural class outside the rural maritime port cities. These depictions were not only commissioned in areas that followed, but rivaled the English church. So Western invasion begins in numbers and represented no immediate threat to the greatest imperial system on the face of the world, China, and remains to be so. Well into the 18th century, Europeans were having the increased impact on China's history and its impact on the global economic platform, as previously mentioned. The tributary system was often no more than a thin cover for a trade in the foreign merchants, especially the Muslim traders who were ambiguous among the Central Asia caravan routes that the southern sea lanes often posed as envoys in order to engage in trade. Most Chinese traditional considered this practice on an abuse of Roman cultural practices and tried to stop it when they detected it. So as they were commissioned through this time as devices that were iconic during the time of the pandemic, while the lives of the entire population were infected with this iconic Black Plague. The entire populations were infected with Black Death, and the merchants from the urban port maintained the importance of those artisans depicted of theatrics through the carved materials, which were influenced or reflected in history by the Mughals, rather, of China. So reflected, not influenced, through carved materials. And we're talking about Mughals of China. So whose statues included of Buddha Shakyamuni and seated in the meditation of Dhyana Mudra from the Chola period, about 12th century Nagapattinam, Tamil Nadu, India, carved from the granite of the third monumental Buddha, which comes from the coastal town of Nagapattinam in southern India, and were seen as a rare flourishing site of Buddhism in the 12th century. Globalization, economic integration, equating to capitalistic system of governance in which money transference develops the economic systems of governance to integrate international international financial systems of distribution amongst the commerce and the mercantile members of the global playing field, never though of before. So, however, it's to integrate economies and technology transferences all over the world in an instantaneous communication through this modernization of societies caused a disruptions rather, despite being positive or negative, while the cultural exchange, frantic paced, the globalization that occurred in such rapid speed for the first major eras of the communications and exchanges that caused the onset of endemics and the rapid development of the pandemics as they emerge on the world stage through commerce. So first in Portugal, the Portuguese are the first to initiate in the capitalistic economic exchange into the Americas and other parts of the world. Gunpowder may indeed have been a factor, although it is unlikely that the importance lay in blowing its feudal walls of China, enjoying such international pace that is aristocratically lineage and did not engage in castle building or architectural style. Excuse me, that is so. There's like a reverb on my voice there for a second. Rather than in a brutalist aristocratical lineage that did not engage in castle building or architectural style, but rather in the brutalist building of the sort of typical in Europe. Thus, China did not have many feudal fortifications to blow up. The Wall of China, designed to keep the steppe nomadics from invading China, or nomads. However, the exchange of the monopolized gunpowder created the value necessary for the commodity to purse, culture, and mercantile exchange in parts of the world never previously exposed to the disease. The onset of the bubonic exchange in the parts of the world never previously exposed to the disease. The onset of the bubonic plague and the transmission of the disease from rats and fleas that traveled along with the merchants of the upper middle class begins to infect the weak immune systems of the nomadic and sedimentary populations, and mutated strains of the disease developed, infecting those not wiped out during the first wave of the endemic. The endemic continues and develops the nomadic enemies to the north. Soon the Song dynasty ultimately falls to the Moguls, most forcibly and forced to emerge from the Eurasian empires and reside within their host. As the immune systems of the surviving population continue with the commerce populations into Eurasia, their colonial neighbors of an eastern coast of Africa into Western Europe through the carriers that previously died before reaching the next seaport of commerce. The Soviets will investigate the world economy that is based on the principles of capitalism in order to produce the most profit and the best possible goods, while wanting to use cheap raw materials that the Eurasian and Indian seaport system established by the peasantry caste system begins to upheaval. So the King of France is murdered, the monarchical rule is overthrown, and those who together under the modern state template that led to the French Revolution under Louis the 16th reign begin to subsequently influence the development of the world market and the changes established to how the conflict, the battle royale, a war with the aristocratic sea and the parliament's court conflicts with the judicial legislation that is vetoed under Louis the 16th. So dynasties within the Chinese with the judicial legislation that is vetoed under Louis XVI. Dynasties within the Chinese empires are overthrown and excluded from the tributary system of port system mercantile. So the Merchants Guild establishes the just price, which poses a serious question for the development of these factors that also provide the artisans with a decent living wage for males and ensures the price of the goods that would not only be gouged, but their capitalistic beliefs that have existed for centuries, price of the goods that would not be, the just price, once again, which poses a serious question for the development of the factors that also provide the artisan with a decent living wage for males and ensures the price of goods won't be gouged. The price of goods won't be gouged. My eyes are having a really hard time focusing on this, I guess because it's dark, but let me keep going. The just price, which poses a serious question for the development of these factors that also provide the artisan with a decent living wage for the male and ensures the price of the goods would not be gouged. Their capitalistic beliefs that have existed for centuries while under attack by the warrior states begins to fray because of the mass production of sugar. The performance of quality checks, the capitalistic beliefs that have existed for centuries while under attack by warrior states that does away with the training programs in the artisans' apprentice shops now. And the artisans begin to do away with these training programs, which compete and illustrate their competence on how to perform tasks with singular focus. Performing just the one step in the candle making process. These specialized tasks, such as pouring wax, pouring metal, are utilized in Paris, the capital city of the wage labor, for much less money. And this is taking place in Paris and simultaneously in other cities like England, which begins to undermine the marketplace in Paris, and simultaneously other cities like England that are the rural peasantry class that have importance and have been forced to participate in the world market. The disconnected classes are vastly dependent on cheap goods and services. They begin to squeeze out more from the large landowners, and the peasantry class begins to rebel and sweep the landowners away. So the working male class begins to raise concern for rises from the male dominance within the small population, aristocracy, and destruction of the upper middle class, which are now in large part unhappy with the state, in particular as they continue in their attempt to centralize the power of the state and the working class, which is also concerned with the disintegration of the guild system and the rising cost of food prices. Market costs, and the peasantry class sees their traditional lifestyles as being compromised by increasing the pressure to fail. So Louis XVI, working male by the socially vulnerable, was previously discussed. The sufficient tax system is created as a result of attempting to reestablish the nuclear family, jobs, male dominance within the European clutch, and force women in every aspect of the culture so as to allow to become landowners, land owning and monopolizing the rural outskirts in every aspect of the nation state, governance system, development of educational reforms. This political system of nobility is and was not an option for many, but not all women. And lastly, capitalism takes over and everyone is left to fend for themselves. Okay, so this is in order to outlive the pandemic, so they are unable to avail, and all of these different types of revolutions, the trading empires. Wage labor helps to establish the world in which they are soon put to a test of strategy with World War II and the Great Depression's emergence in less than like a decade. So these political power struggles of Indian European submission to the European and Russian and Japanese feudal systems, aiding to women's opportunity for some sort of political order within the global trading market. This political revival establishes the mercantile system of governance as previously mentioned, and the tributary system was often no more than a thin cover for a trade, and that foreign merchants, especially in the Muslim traders who were ubiquitous among the Central Asian caravan routes that the southern sea lanes often posed as envoys in order to engage in trade that takes over the world economic market as capitalists establish a free-for-all system, cultural exchange within the world market that has established in a centralized area of the all-sea port system of trading among the urban elites that begins to reintegrate trade relations with the Mongols, Eurasia, and in a push to open the western border for trade. So French enforced through their exclusivity of gunpowder and the access to textiles and ready-made garments as resources to fight off the English Parliament and their territorial compounds, being to continue in an indicate war state to avoid the collapse of their economy as settling the land disputes amongst the agricultural peasantry class that would certainly cause the collapse of the English system of governance. Ottoman Empire struggles to maintain the order in the Western Hemisphere. A number of intellectuals and empire embrace the national secularism within the hemisphere and within this Ottoman Empire to preserve it as a modern nation state based in the Western government. This would collapse after 1918. It's a political sector of the national movement of Islam that its influence within the nation state to be secular nationalist versus Saudi monarchy. The Iranians basically nationalizing the oil industry to provide a redisbursement among the participants of the free market world economy, began an agreement amongst the secular nationalists in order to preserve a modern state and include Japan's industrial control of the playing field. The crisis industry owned by the British begins to experience conflicts from the cultural exchange on the world stage through the language barriers. So the global superpower, the United States, participates in place of the Chinese on the world stage, strategically employing an alliance again, undermining the military forces that have harsh relations based in large part to the contradictory theologies now densely populating the Mediterranean ports of Lebanon, Egypt, England territories. They begin to establish educational reforms and westernized approaches to medicine. The exhausted authoritarian system of governance from the French continues to take inventory. A clash of cultures established relations with the Saudis, Sunni, and the oil industries over the push for the Western modernization, large-scale investments in the arts and cultural developments with the agricultural field. So this suffers because there's a growing unrest, in part for Iran because the modernization, while the cleansing of the poor continues, the displacement and the development of textiles in Iran and the threats, the traditional market's place of the cultural influence and principal features of the closing markets and the medical conflicts similar to the open political systems. These conservative views of their modernizations of consumer culture and this modernization of the middle class or Middle East, the workforce of women to be created despite the traditional nuclear family and preservation of stay-at-home characterizations of the radical system of organization amongst the caste system of modern-day Iran. So during this period of consumer paradise, industrialization of modern economy creates economic disparities and conflicts on the world market, which are now on a rise. So these points were made in modern day galleries as a political protest for women's equal rights in today's American society, which was fundamentally comprised by the Sultan ruler of having to apply Islamic law under free trade. Consumer dream is made available. So this is Islamic law under the free trade, this is where I read the wrong line again. In areas, the consumer paradise spreads to Latin America and Japan, which starts to realize that the consumer dream is made available. The Great Recession lingers into 2010 and 2011. So this definition of family through the purchase of new identity with rapid economic growth begins to compromise and be undermined and begins to undermine the capitalistic mentality, the world stages on the world stage, and gives rise to the Indian population of mercantile guilds that begin to prosper under the monarchical rule. And with the emergence of the free trade agreements, that desponds as the political practices that establish world order on the free market, despite ill temperaments that begin to ensue amongst the societies excluding from the trade agreements. So I think that is kind of where I left off yesterday, but I'm going to keep going. So that neighboring lineage group with a Renaissance approach to expansion and trade. I keep referencing the videos and I'm forgetting that the order of them is probably not going to make sense when I keep saying tomorrow or yesterday or something like that. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep reading. So this Renaissance approach to expansion and trade, which was expressed in arts and the mimics that the Romans, their practice to attack and rally members from the imperial empire to defend the interests and their nomadic tribesmen with exquisite horsemanship, decentralized competitive societies, and aim to defend the lineage groups of China. So the aristocratic lineage began to rival the state and the needs of the agricultural peasants, rationalizing the use of compasses and other technologies to cross the West European ports to the long established ports of East Africa and Asia. So it's mentioning, or I'm pointing out in the writing, that it is long established, which is a success in capitalism. You want the reputation that goes along with the money or your bank account or whatever goods it is you have, because what that means is that you didn't get sick, you have a healthy body because your body naturally was able to interact with others and not contract the disease. So that's a good thing. That's a success. And during a pandemic, it's also a success during a capitalistic modernization of the world market. So that's basically what that's like a fancy way of saying. Like, I'm not trying to go off in a tangent. What it's basically establishing is that that is why some of the people were more successful at that time, they were long established. Other people were not really mentioning that they were long established and not successful. It's that they died. So they weren't not successful maybe at one point in their career of being a merchant. They more than likely were malnourished and died. That's kind of what that means. So I am going to keep going. So they're basically rivaling the state, and that's in regards to the needs of the agricultural peasants, rationalizing now this introduction of technology by the use of compass and other technologies to cross the world European ports to the long established ports of East Africa and Asia, to find an all-sea route to Western Europe, and the technologies previously mentioned in order to include gunpowder, and the invention of the steamboat for rapid means of mobility and transportation in the Pacific and into the Americas. In China, the Tang Dynasty, like I mentioned, Buddhism, that would be something to look into. Is if you like art, you could find like all of the granite statues. You could probably find somewhere that they have all of them. They probably go on tour and are getting borrowed by, the MoMA or something, and are on view. I'm not sure. I couldn't guarantee it, but I would suggest utilizing maybe like a visual aspect of this conversation as a tool, because it will help you understand maybe the changes of modernization, the conversation that was happening maybe between society to society, and whether it was subtle, the basic removal of conflict and agreements with most trade agreements being like the deciding factor. So like if I couldn't capitalize on our friendship or our relationship, it really doesn't serve me. And we live in a society that's like a very common mentality. But I mean, it would be interesting to have that conversation with someone from maybe like a different developed country, so just to get some insight to see what their opinion would be. But if that's not something that if neither one of those options are readily available to you, you can continue interpreting the information or doing your own research and seeing what maybe like the Indian subcontinent, Africa, Europe, and the Americas look like in conversation. In addition to that, there are also treatments of Islam that do not lend themselves to the geographical categorizing used into the other 5 cases of socially constructed markets or trading ports, or examples of modernization as far as like introducing technology, whether it's maritime or agriculturally implemented or utilized rather. So what I'm getting at is this organizing in the Arabian Peninsula of Islam soon spreads to North Africa and into Europe. So across the Indian subcontinent and the Central Asia and into the Indonesian archipelago. So yet the technical differences hardly would allow its exclusion from its group, given the enormous impact of Islamic faith both then and now. My point being that there are like tour excursions, kind of like that could also be something you look into. Sometimes you could look at things online and that be how you interpret it, if you don't want to like get a first-person account or something like that, or if you feel more like logistical and writing something out for yourself, like if something's making sense but I say it over and over a certain way because I don't want to forget it, that's how I learned it, that's my constructed argument for the next point I'm going to make, and it reiterates who I'm talking about in a very concrete manner so that I'm able to give you some of the context that I can provide. But what I'm suggesting is that you could utilize that as like a mind map if you wanted to create something of historical value, maybe like a, what are they called, time capsule, to kind of have this conversation in a different vein or a different capacity. I'm not suggesting that you actually even have to do anything. I'm just I'm thinking if anybody does like have an interest in this stuff, that I personally would like to see like your take, or like if you were to write it out. I mean, and I'll definitely put these pages, once I'm finished going through them, online for everyone, but I just thought it would be interesting to see like maybe like a different perspective or something. So I can't offer you a different one, but I will do my best to keep reiterating the facets of the book and the text and what I have documented of importance, and try to apply like an up-to-date and accurate version of COVID's impact on at least my day-to-day life, and capitalism or something like that. Some of the things that I've seen maybe aren't necessarily like going to be any different than like context, but if there were like resources, I've pretty much discussed them in the text, so again I'll stick to the text. But I don't know that I'd after doing all of the work of writing all of this out, suggest like it is that I would recommend going to look at these statues without maybe doing some research, especially if you want to tie it back to this information or formulate it. And maybe if I could say it a different way, if none of these things seem like we're not like hearing it and it makes like the most sense, another thing you could do is read the book, because the book, just the way I'm kind of like reiterating and going over the information very methodically, but also very like routinely, so that I'm able to apply the context. Like I said, it is very good about sticking to a really unbiased approach to this time of history. It's really giving you like an idea of what was going on, rather than how people might have personally thought that it was like personally thought that it was too maybe like rooted in biology, or rooted in art, or rooted in history, or rooted in like German propaganda. I mean, there are so many like things that people like will really invest a lot of time and get into when they're going over like pandemics and stuff like that, and like endemic and basically the origin of modern science. Personally, I think, to me, I don't need to deviate too much from it. I stick to this stuff, the book, and I try and like get as concrete throughout like the entire book, basically, or the entire like capitalistic system or this modernization as best I can, without like I really like I really like marble and granite, or minimalism or something like that, and spend like 18 pages dissecting that. But I don't also want to discourage you from doing that, because there are like probably 20 to 30 pages worth of text you could write out just based off of the one statues, or the one statues I don't know why I keep saying statues. I'm like trying not to. Anyways, there are like so many things you could say about just the one statue I keep mentioning, that you could do that if you'd like. But for the purposes of my videos, I'm going to stick to the pandemic and endemic, and making sure that the updates to what has taken place in society as far as it being now COVID has basically entered its 4th year. I think it was March, so we'll be entering the 4th year of the pandemic here in March, and so it's safe to say the 4th year, and basically kind of applying that context that I've gotten to the writing. So hopefully my voice is like getting clearer. It felt like I'm having a hard time enunciating, and I repeat the same kind of difficult vernacular over and over, but it is the vernacular to use. I may not have the perfect accent for it to communicate these things, but trust me, it's gonna be that these are, to my best ability, as being original work, of course, the best of my ability in original work to provide this argument or this discussion or conversation for the pandemic that we're now about to enter the 4th year of, with what I have taken from the book. So that is why it's repetitive, because that is something that I don't want to lose, or there's so much to unpack or so much to apply as far as context goes. So if you feel like I can't sit through it, I'm sorry. I know that isn't for everybody, and my feelings won't get hurt. So feel free to just disregard like all of it, or utilize tools and resources to the best of your ability so that you are able to get the most out of this experience as possible, because I don't know, this is like now the 4th hour, 6th hour, something like that, and I've got a lot more to go. So so hopefully you get the most out of this, because I would hate for you, if you are listening, to sit through all 6 or X, if you do decide to follow up with the rest of the X amount of videos, and you just feel like, I really can't stand that that's how she is going over the information. It's hard to hear. I'm sorry about that, but I can't really deviate from the pages. So hopefully maybe you do want to finish out the material online, but if you feel like it's not, I would definitely try a tool or a resource and see if that doesn't push you through the rest of it, the conversation, because sometimes, like, I keep hearing this girl talk about the statue. Now she's mentioned it like 6 or 7 times. Researching or seeing the statue or the statues that I've mentioned, or some of the work that took place, might motivate you or inspire you or fuel your interest. So hopefully that is the case, but either way, I am finishing up for now, and then I'll pick up from this point. I won't just start over. I'll pick up from this point tomorrow, but I really felt like there was a lot I didn't get into and cover. So that being the case, we are at this point in the text, and I will follow up at this point. And if you are now listening to the series and it's that you don't want to just sit through it and realize like halfway that you've already basically heard it or something like that, I'll try to maybe make a note of it at the beginning or something to prevent that from happening. But that is all, thanks.